Hi, this is Nat, and Ron Perlman was wrong. I'll get to that in a moment, but first off, today I'm talking about fun, and how perhaps our vocabulary has become outdated when it comes to describing the varying experiences we have with games. That's not to say fun doesn't exist, nor that it is not descriptive enough, but I do think that we need to embrace the idea that when we say we had fun, that maybe we are using that word to describe something else. This war of mine is not fun. It's engaging and it is depressing. In the game, you manage the needs and desires of a group of survivors in a war-torn conflict. It's like The Sims, but with more focus on the futility of being. As you encounter trades you can't make and raids which end poorly, you grow to feel that you are standing in front of a leaking dam without the reach nor the number of fingers required to plug the ever-increasing quantity of openings. You feel confronted by a slow rolling wave of inevitability. There is nothing about the game which is fun in the traditional sense of the word, but when asked what I thought about it, I immediately responded, "It's great, it's fun," when really I should have been saying, "It's great, you'll hate yourself." Papers, Please is not fun. In the game you play as an immigration inspector at a border checkpoint in a fictional country at a time before I was born, and it is absolute torture to play. I am tormented at my desire to support the anti-government organisation due to my ever-increasing dislike of my country's regime, against the desire that I and my family continue to live. I can break the rules, or I can take my time to carefully check each passport, but always I must wonder what the cost will be. If I don't work hard enough, then I have to deal with which member of my family doesn't get to eat. Call of Duty Ghosts isn't fun. No, it just sucks. I'm not going to claim that this game has some secret subversive genius either, but it did something I think was important. It was big enough and dumb enough to draw attention to how big and dumb things were. In it, militaristic and nonsensical politics hold sway, as an American superweapon is used against America to devastating effect. Rather than paint this as a warning about the potentially dire consequences of the creation of weapons such as these, and notions like mutually assured destruction, the story resolves to have the good guys, Americans, claim a version of this weapon built by the bad guys, non-Americans, and climaxes with them using it to devastating effect on them. The game was ridiculed for its plot at release, and I think that it has had an impact on some AAA games since. Last year's Titanfall may have given us little more than an extended tutorial of a campaign, but it was still one which suggested there were two sides to this conflict. Wolfenstein gave us even more reason to hate the Nazis, with grotesque experiments, and an impossible choice in which of two characters we would let die. But the reaction to Ghosts is suitably most notable in Call of Duty Advanced Warfare. The gameplay may have made a few alterations, in keeping with its near-future setting, but it is in the plot that I see the most difference. Sure, press F to pay respects is mawkish and awkward, but as silly as it is still an attempt to humanise its fictional conflict. True, the game celebrates combat and violence, encouraging us to join in and blast away, but it's a first-person shooter, and that's what they're supposed to do. Instead, it is in how the main villain is presented to us, not as some non-American lunatic, but as an almost perfect subversion of the American dream. A self-made billionaire who runs a company dedicated to making America safer. It is how he sets about doing this which makes him the villain, using foreign terrorist groups, developing biological weapons. Now I am not going to pretend that it is either particularly deep or meaningful, but I would say that it is a very interesting shift from the plot of Ghosts. COD games are huge. They are one of the recognisable faces of games to the non-gaming world. And though I doubt anyone really buys COD games for their plots, the shift away from a Team America World Police tone is demonstrative of how games are advancing. But this is nothing new, it's just becoming more and more noticeable. Spec Ops: The Line set out to unsettle us. It begins with the comforting setup of American soldiers versus those foreigners from someplace over there. We're heroes on a rescue mission in this godforsaken land, beset with terrorism and sandstorms. But as it progresses, the game cleverly robs us of our heroism by subverting the actions we thought we were performing. It shows us that we are the aggressor, the antagonist. We perform horrific acts in the name of a goal which itself becomes more and more clouded, before culminating in a crescendo of absurdist self-destruction. Yet it does not sit well with the game, which nonetheless emulates the mechanics of the types of games it is criticising. Ron Perlman was wrong. War does change, at least in games. But it isn't just war games which are increasingly behaving this way. Walkathon Gone Home received much praise for its non-traditional gameplay and sombre plot. Personally, I found it a little silly. It was on the opposite end of the spectrum to a Call of Duty game, with its focus on a personal tale, yet the story that developed was about as subtle. Braid was set up as just another brightly coloured retro-inspired puzzle platformer, and then it had us pursue the very woman who sought to escape us. In The Last of Us and The Walking Dead, the world as we understand it is gone forever. The best we can ever hope to do in these worlds is to endure, to survive. Shadow of the Colossus follows our possibly misguided and somewhat selfish endeavours and ends up with at best a bittersweet conclusion. These games, which are not fun, are always something else instead. They may be rewarding, or engaging in ways like Fallout 3, where after a day spent avoiding deathclaws and scavenging for caps and equipment, we can return to the familiar faces of the people we let live. Yet all the while, the world around us remains grey, bleak, sick and broken, literally nestled between the cracks in the rubble of a world which is forever gone. Similarly, Metro 2033 has us engaged in a futile war and out to destroy a perceived enemy that simply isn't. Do we describe these games as fun because we do not know any other ways to describe them? I'm not sure that's the case. Any review I read these days stresses the engagement of the story, sometimes going too far and attacking games which did not need to be as meaningful as Chekhov. Nonetheless, robbing pensioners in this war of mine is an experience. It's not fun, it's revelatory. You learn about yourself and approach the game with a heightened empathy. Are we sadists and actually derive genuine glee from the suffering and misery? Perhaps sometimes we do. There's undeniably a certain cathartic pleasure to be had in directing your avatar to behave in antisocial manners, see them do and say things that you never would, and have them endure the consequences of these actions. Just because games can be immersive, that does not mean that they always are. I've sent people out to scavenge, without the equipment nor acumen, just to see what happens. I've ploughed through pedestrians, just to see their bodies fly, and the wanted level rise. I've said mean things to Joker, just because. Are we embarrassed by the notion that something as silly as a game may garner this much of a reaction within us? That this thing, that we remember as being the coolest thing in the toy shop, can elicit a very real response? I think that the traditional insecurity around the capability of games as a medium has mostly receded, but our individual expectation of what that should be is something that remains. There is nothing wrong with accepting this subjective perspective, while also striving for the ever-elusive ideal of objectivity. Or is it all just for the sake of simply being brief, and giving a concise recognition to the thing we experienced, that we call these games fun? This seems quite likely. We live in a global age, littered with recognizable abbreviation and symbolism, all for the sake of streamlining communication. I can WTF, OMG, and be understood the world over. Maybe fun is simply our unrecognized slang for good. I think that to some degree, all of these things come into play. Fun is a vague and useful expression. It is the simple way to indicate we appreciate the experience. It's a spoiler-free endorsement of an experience we would recommend and hope others experience too. Sometimes fun just doesn't have to be fun. We are Dinoslippers USB. If you had vaguely nondescript fun with this video, then give us a click on the like button. If you want to talk about how much you enjoyed games that you did not actually enjoy, then fire it in the comments. And if you really engaged with our difficult narrative consequences, then click subscribe and check out our other videos.